Hello, my fellow apprentices of the arcane arts of gaming, and welcome back to the Game Codex. I'm your host, Alora, and my mission, as always, is to crack open the complex, wonderful world of video games and serve it up in a way that's fun, understandable, and maybe just a little bit hilarious. Now, I want you to think back, way back, to a specific game from your past. Maybe it was on a chunky beige computer monitor or a CRT television that weighed more than a small refrigerator. You remember the characters, their blocky, pixelated forms that your imagination generously filled in to be these hyper-realistic heroes. You remember the worlds, built from pre-rendered backgrounds and a healthy dose of just pretend. That game is a time capsule, a specific pixelated shrine in your memory. Now, fast forward to today. You're scrolling through a digital storefront, and you see it, that title, that name. But something's different. The logo is sleeker. The screenshots look like they're from a movie. Your heart does a little flip-flop. It's coming back. But then the confusion sets in. The comments are a war zone of conflicting terminology. One person shouts, "It's a full remake." Another declares, "No, it's just a lazy remaster." And your well-meaning uncle chimes in calling the new Call of Duty a reboot, and suddenly you're questioning everything you know. What do these words even mean? And more importantly, is this new version of your beloved classic a faithful tribute or a horrifying betrayal? Well, my friends, that is the minefield we are navigating today. Strap in, because we are embarking on a grand quest to understand one of the most exciting and sometimes infuriating trends in modern gaming. We are journeying deep into the heart of From Pixels to Polygons, the art of the video game remake. Over the next half hour, we're going to be the intrepid archaeologists of this process. We'll excavate the crucial definitions that separate a master from a remake, from a reboot. We'll hold up the glorious triumphs, the gold standards that show us how it's done. And with a very long stick and appropriate safety gear, we'll also poke at the catastrophic failures, the projects that serve as stark warnings for what happens when it all goes wrong. We'll ask the big philosophical questions. Are these new versions preserving our history, or are they quietly erasing it? And what does it truly take to not just remake a game, but to honor its spirit? But to truly understand the destination, we have to start with the journey. We have to begin with a single moment that shattered expectations and redefined what a remake could be. A moment that proved this wasn't just about a fresh coat of paint, but about rebuilding a legend from the ground up. So let's set the scene for where the modern remake era truly began, with a reveal that made an entire generation of gamers, including me, scream at our screens in pure, unadulterated joy. To understand the how, we first need to understand the what. And that means we have to get our vocabulary in order. Because before we can appreciate the stunning reveal of a project like the Final Fantasy VII Remake, we need to be crystal clear on what exactly it was revealing itself to be. So, let's get our definitions straight. It's time to talk about what separates a simple facelift from a full-blown reincarnation. So, we've seen the hype, we've felt the feelings, but before we get too deep into the how and the why, we absolutely must tackle the what. What are we even talking about when we use these words? Because, my friends, they are not interchangeable. Using them as such is a one-way ticket to confusing your friends and horrifying game developers in their secret lairs. Let's break it down. Starting with the simplest of the trio, the remaster. Think of a remaster like a professional photo restoration. You take an old, beloved photograph, let's say the original Shadow of the Colossus on the PS2. It's a beautiful photo, but it's a little faded, there's a scratch in the corner, and the resolution is, well, nostalgic. A remaster is like having an expert come in, digitally clean it up, enhance the colors, sharpen the lines, and maybe even fix that scratch. The photo itself hasn't changed. The composition is identical. You're just seeing it in the best possible light, often on modern hardware. Technically, this usually means bumping up the resolution to 4K, smoothing out the frame rate to a buttery 60 frames per second, and maybe improving texture filtering. Games like The Last of Us Remastered, BioShock the Collection, or Skyrim Anniversary Edition are prime examples. It's the same game, the same code, the same everything, just looking and running significantly better. It's a welcome back party for a classic, and it's often the easiest way for publishers to dip their toes in the nostalgia pool. If a remaster is a photo restoration, a remake is a full-blown, from-the-ground-up reconstruction of the entire house in the photo. They're not just cleaning the windows, they're pouring a new foundation, rewiring the electricity, and maybe even adding a new wing or two. A remake takes the original game's blueprint, its core story, its world, its key characters, and rebuilds it using modern technology and often modern game design philosophies. The developers aren't just touching up old assets, they are creating brand new ones. New character models, new environments, a new audio landscape, and very frequently completely overhauled gameplay. The Final Fantasy VII Remake we just talked about, it didn't just make Cloud's polygons smoother, it rebuilt Midgar as a sprawling, tangible city. It replaced a classic turn-based combat with a thrilling, real-time hybrid system. It's a reinterpretation. It's the same symphony, but played by a different orchestra, with a few new movements added. Other textbook examples include the Resident Evil 2 and 3 remakes, which we'll get to, and the Demon's Souls remake. They are familiar, yet fundamentally new experiences. The reboot. This is where things get philosophical. A reboot isn't just improving or rebuilding an existing story. A reboot is saying, you know what, we're going to hit the reset button on this entire timeline. It's a deliberate, fresh start, often created to attract a new audience unburdened by decades of convoluted lore. A reboot takes the core concept of a franchise, the premise, the name, the general vibe, and starts the narrative over from scratch. It might keep some character names and basic ideas, but it feels no obligation to follow the previous storylines. It's a parallel universe. Think of the God of War game from 2018. It's still Kratos, it's still based in mythology, but it's a dramatic, tonal, narrative, and gameplay departure from the original Greek-era games. It's a reboot. The Tomb Raider series with the 2013 game was a reboot, re-establishing Lara Croft's origin. Doom 2016 was a reboot that masterfully captured the spirit of the original while crafting a new, self-contained narrative hellscape. So, to recap, a remaster is a facelift. A remake is an organ transplant and a new wardrobe on the same person. A reboot is a whole new person with the same name. Got it? Good, because with this knowledge in our inventory, we can now go hunting for the gold standard. So, we have our definitions. Now let's talk about a game that didn't just meet the definition of a remake, it perfected it. A game that had fans of the 1998 classic holding their breath, terrified that this precious memory would be tarnished. I'm talking, of course, about Capcom's Resident Evil 2 from 2019. This is the textbook example, the one we point to and say, see, that's how you do it. Why? Because it masterfully walked a razor-thin tightrope. On one side, there was the crushing weight of nostalgia. On the other, the demands of a modern gaming audience that might not have the patience for tank controls and fixed camera angles. First, let's talk about the most obvious change, the perspective. The original was a tense, cinematic experience with fixed camera angles that framed every room like a horror movie shot. The remake ditched that entirely for a tight, over-the-shoulder, third-person view. This was a monumental risk, but it worked because the team didn't just slap on a new camera, they rebuilt the entire game's DNA around it. The tension of the original didn't come from the camera angles themselves, but from the limited visibility, the dread of what was around the corner, and the scarcity of resources. The remake translated that perfectly. The new perspective made it more immersive and personal. You're not watching Leon or Claire navigate a spooky hallway. You are navigating it, and Mr. X's footsteps are thundering right behind you. And speaking of Mr. X, oh, that tyrant.
In the original, he was a formidable presence, but his pathfinding was limited. In the remake, he becomes a relentless, unscripted force of nature. He can follow you almost anywhere, his presence a constant, heart-pounding source of stress. This was a reinterpretation of an old idea using modern AI, and it became one of the most memorable aspects of the game. It showed that the developers weren't just copying notes, they were understanding the feeling those notes were supposed to evoke, sheer, unadulterated panic, and found a new, more potent way to deliver it. Then there's the Raccoon City Police Department itself. The layout is hauntingly familiar to anyone who spent 1998 mapping it out on graph paper. The key locations are all there, the lobby, the dark room, the interrogation room, but the architecture is now fully realized in stunning, gruesome detail. You can see the gore, read the desperate notes of the fallen officers, and feel the history of the place. They expanded areas, added new puzzles that felt perfectly in keeping with the old ones, and created a space that was both a loving tribute and a fresh, terrifying exploration. The gameplay loop remained pure Resident Evil. Manage your limited inventory, solve puzzles, and choose your fights carefully because ammo is scarce. But the controls were slick and modern, the gore system was disgustingly detailed, and the audio design, my goodness, the audio design, every groan, every squelch, every distant footstep was engineered to fray your nerves. Resident Evil 2 2019 succeeded because it asked the right question. The question wasn't, how can we make the old game look better? The question was, if we were to make Resident Evil 2 for the first time today, with all our current technology and design knowledge, what would it be? The answer was a masterpiece that honored the past without being enslaved by it. It proved that a remake could be more than just a nostalgia trip. It could be a definitive way to experience a classic. But what happens when developers have a different answer to that question? What happens when Faithful and Reimagined start to pull in opposite directions? That's where things get really interesting.
So we've seen the perfect balance, but the world of remakes isn't a one-size-fits-all affair. In fact, two of the most celebrated modern remakes stand on almost opposite ends of the philosophy spectrum. On one end, you have the Demon's Souls remake by Blue Point Games, a bastion of faithful preservation. On the other, you have Final Fantasy VII Remake, a glorious, ambitious reimagining that isn't afraid to break its own source material. Let's start with Demon's Souls. This is what I call the digital archaeologist approach. Bluepoint's goal wasn't to reinterpret Hidetaka Miyazaki's vision, it was to excavate it and present it in its most pristine, idealized form. Think of the original Demon's Souls on the PS3 as a legendary ancient statue. But it's been weathered by time, covered in moss, and maybe missing an arm. Bluepoint came along with the most advanced tools, carefully cleaned every inch, restored the missing arm exactly as the original sculptor intended, and then put it under a perfect museum-quality light. The result is stunning. The core of the game, the brutal, unforgiving gameplay, the labyrinthine level design, the placement of every single enemy and item is identical. They changed almost nothing of substance. What they did change was the presentation. The graphics are a generational leap, the audio is a visceral, immersive masterpiece, and the performance is rock solid. It's the original game's soul housed in a new, breathtaking body. It's the ultimate you had to be there experience, but now you don't have to have been there. It's all right here in its most perfect form. Now, take a deep breath and look at Final Fantasy VII Remake. This is not a digital archaeologist. This is a mad scientist who loves the original subject so much they decided to build a new, even more complex organism around it. Square Enix didn't just want to retell the story of Cloud Strife. They wanted to expand it, deconstruct it, and in a move that shocked everyone, literally comment on the nature of remakes and nostalgia itself. The changes are foundational. The combat is a complete overhaul, blending real-time action with tactical, ability-based commands.
The city of Midgar, which was maybe 5 hours in the original, is now a sprawling 30-40-hour experience, fleshing out side characters and world building in ways that were impossible in 1997. And then there are the Whispers, these spectral entities that enforce the destiny of the original plot and our hero's rebellion against them. This was a meta-narrative bombshell. It was the developers saying, "We know the story, so do we, but what if we change it?" This is the reimagining approach in its most extreme and brave form. It risks alienating purists to create something that can surprise even the most hardcore fan. It's not just a remake, it's a sequel, a commentary, and a new story all at once. One is a perfect restoration of a classic painting. The other is a new painting that uses the original as its central motif, but then splatters new, wild colors all around it. Both are valid, both are incredible, but they serve entirely different purposes for the audience.
But bravery can sometimes feel like betrayal, and not every change is welcomed with open arms. This is where we wade into the murky, turbulent waters of controversy, because for every fan thrilled by a new interpretation, there's another who feels a sacred text has been desecrated. Let's look at the 3 biggest flashpoints: story, gameplay, and art style. Story changes are the most volatile. We just talked about the Whispers in FF7R. For some, it was a brilliant meta-commentary. For others, it was an unforgivable deviation from the plot they loved. This is the fundamental risk. When you expand a narrative, you risk diluting it. When you change a character's motivation or a key plot point, you are tampering with core memories. It's a high-stakes gamble where the payoff can be a new classic, or the consequence can be a permanent rift with your most dedicated fanbase. Then there's gameplay. This is often the most practical change, but it can be just as divisive. Take the Warcraft 3 Reforged disaster, which we'll get to in more detail, but a key complaint was that they were planning to update the gameplay and mechanics to align more with modern World of Warcraft before backtracking. The original fans screamed, "This isn't the game we loved." The gameplay is the game. Changing a combat system from turn-based to action or altering core mechanics doesn't just update the experience, it can fundamentally alter its identity. It's the difference between a chess remaster and a chess remake where the bishops now move like knights. It might be a fun new game, but is it still chess? And finally, the most subtle but equally potent controversy, art style. This isn't about graphics being better, it's about them being different. The Demon's Souls remake, for all its faithfulness, faced some criticism here. The original had a certain bleak, foggy, almost dreamlike aesthetic. The remake is graphically superior, but some felt it lost that ethereal, low-poly charm in favor of a more concrete, high-fidelity realism. A character's face that was once left to your imagination is now rendered in explicit detail, and maybe that detail doesn't match what was in your head for over a decade. Changing the art direction can change the entire tone and mood of a game, and for many, that tone is inseparable from the experience itself.
Now, let's step away from the artistic debates and passionate fan reactions for a moment and put on a cold, corporate hat. Why are we drowning in remakes, remasters, and reboots? Is it purely out of the goodness of publishers' hearts? Well, partly. But mostly, it's because it's one of the smartest, safest bets in the business. It's a financial triple threat. First, you have built-in brand recognition. Imagine you're a movie executive. You have 2 scripts on your desk. One is a completely original sci-fi epic with no stars. The other is a new version of The Godfather. Which one are you greenlighting? It's the same in gaming. Marketing a new IP is incredibly expensive and risky. You have to introduce the world, the characters, the concept, everything from scratch. A remake of a beloved classic already has a name people know and trust. The marketing sells itself. You loved this? Well, it's back, and it's shinier. That's a powerful message. Second, and this is the big one, nostalgia is a potent, bankable emotion. Game publishers aren't just selling you a game, they're selling you a time machine. They're selling you a chance to relive your childhood, your teenage years, a specific happy time in your life. That emotional connection is worth more than any pre-order bonus. It's a shortcut to your wallet through your heart. You're not just buying Crash Bandicoot, you're buying a ticket back to 1996, sitting on the floor in your pajamas with a bowl of cereal. That's a powerful drug, and publishers are the dealers. Third, it's a fantastical way to test the waters for a new franchise. Let's say a publisher wants to revive a dead franchise. Do they spend $100 million on a brand new sequel to a series that hasn't been relevant in 15 years? That's risky. Instead, they spend a smaller amount on a remake of the most beloved entry. If it sells like hotcakes, bam, you've just proven there's a hungry market. You've reintroduced the characters to a new generation. The door is now wide open for a brand new sequel. If the remake flops, well, you contained your risk. It's a reconnaissance mission paid for by the consumers. So while we debate the artistic merits, remember there's a brilliant business machine humming in the background. It's a low-risk, high-reward strategy that feeds our hunger for the familiar. But this business reality forces us to ask a difficult, almost philosophical question.
This is the central, thorny dilemma at the heart of the entire remake phenomenon. As we enthusiastically embrace these beautiful, modernized versions, are we inadvertently letting the originals fade away? Are we, in our quest to make the past more accessible, actually erasing it? This is the tension between preservation and modernization. Purists will argue, and not without reason, that a remake, no matter how faithful, can never truly replace the original. The original is a historical artifact. It's a product of its time, its technology, and its design limitations. Those limitations are often what gave the game its unique character. The fixed camera angles of the original Resident Evil weren't just a technical constraint. They were a deliberate artistic choice to create a cinematic claustrophobic feel. The blocky, low-poly characters of Final Fantasy VII forced your imagination to fill in the gaps, making the world feel larger and more personal in your mind. When you modernize a game, you smooth out those rough edges. You replace the tank controls with fluid movement. You replace the pre-rendered backgrounds with fully 3D environments. In doing so, you are fundamentally altering the experience. You are, in a way, destroying the original to create something new. It's like restoring an old black and white film by colorizing it and adding CGI. It might be more palatable to a modern audience, but is it the same piece of art? And there's a practical danger here. If a beloved classic gets a fantastic, widely available remake, does the original version become commercially obsolete? Will publishers see any reason to keep the original, inferior version available on digital storefronts? There's a risk that the remake becomes the de facto version, and the original, with all its historical quirks and charms, gets relegated to obscurity, only playable on aging hardware or through emulation. We have to ask ourselves, is the goal to replace the past, or to provide a new, parallel path alongside it? The ideal world is one where both the original and the remake are preserved and accessible, allowing us to appreciate the journey from pixels to polygons. But sometimes the goal isn't to replace or reimagine, but to perfectly recapture a feeling. And no one has done this better than the dynamic duo of my childhood, the Crash Bandicoot N-Sane Trilogy and the Spyro Reignited Trilogy. These are the ultimate examples of the faithful facelift. They took the digital archaeologist approach of Demon's Souls and applied it to the 3D platformer genre with a huge injection of pure, uncut, joyful nostalgia. The philosophy here was simple and brilliant. Don't change the game. I mean it. The level geometry, identical. The placement of every box, every enemy, every jump, pixel perfect. The physics? They got as close as humanly possible, even though they were building it from scratch in a new engine. The developers at Vicarious Visions and Toys for Bob understood that they weren't just handling code, they were handling people's memories. They knew that if you changed the timing of a single jump in Road to Nowhere, an entire generation would revolt. So what did they change? Everything you see in here. They gave Crash and Spyro and every single character in their worlds a breathtaking, cartoonish makeover, full of personality and charm. They took the original low-poly models and said, yes, this is what they were always meant to look like. They re-recorded the entire soundtrack, staying incredibly faithful to the original melodies while giving them a full orchestral richness. The magic of these collections is that they feel like you've put on a pair of magical glasses that let you see the game you remember playing, not the game you actually played. Your memory has already done the work of smoothing out the jaggy polygons and filling in the details. These remakes just made that memory a reality. They were a safe, warm, and wonderfully executed blanket of nostalgia. And they proved that there is a massive, hungry audience for this specific, respectful approach to preservation. They were a love letter, and we all got to read it. But for every loving letter, there's a angry breakup note. For every Resident Evil 2, there is a catastrophic failure that serves as a cautionary tale. These are the projects where the delicate balance is lost, where the business motives overshadow the artistic respect, and where the fans' trust is shattered. Let's put on our hazard suits and examine the toxic spill that is Warcraft 3 Reforged. This was supposed to be a crown jewel, a glorious remake of one of the most influential real-time strategy games of all time. What did fans get? A product that was, in almost every measurable way, inferior to the game that was released in 2002. The list of sins is long and tragic. They promised stunning, rebuild cutscenes and character models. What they delivered was a jarring, low-effort mix that didn't live up to the trailers. The new user interface was clunky and poorly designed. But the most egregious sin, the one that truly broke the community, was what they did to the original game. Upon release, Warcraft 3 Reforged didn't just exist alongside the original, it replaced it. Everyone who owned the original classic was forced to update to the Reforged client, which removed key features like clans and custom campaigns, and introduced a host of new bugs. It was a hostile takeover of gaming history. They didn't just deliver a bad product, they set the original product on fire. The backlash was immediate, brutal, and entirely justified. It became a case study in how to alienate your most loyal fans. It demonstrated a profound lack of respect for the source material and for the player's ownership of their own gaming experiences. Other failures, like the underwhelming Mafia Definitive Edition, which controversially cut content, or the Grand Theft Auto The Trilogy The Definitive Edition, which was famously riddled with game-breaking bugs and laughable visual glitches, all stem from the same root, a perception that the project was a cheap, cynical cash grab, not a labor of love. These failures teach us a crucial lesson. The audience's nostalgia is a fragile thing. You can tap into it, you can celebrate it, but if you treat it with disrespect or greed, that love can curdle into rage faster than you can say refund.
So, where do we go from here? We've learned from the triumphs and the tragedies. The remake train has left the station, and it shows no signs of slowing down. So let's put on our futurist hats and gaze into the crystal ball. What's the next logical stop on the Nostalgia Express? The pattern is already emerging. We've moved through the 8-bit and 16-bit eras, and we are now firmly in the golden age of remaking the early 3D classics from the PS1, PS2, and original Xbox era. These are the games that have the strongest nostalgic pull for the current, spending age generation, but whose graphics have aged the most poorly. So the low-hanging fruit is obvious. I would bet my entire collection of useless potions that the Legend of Dragoon remake is being discussed in some boardroom right now. The cult classic RPGs are prime targets. What about Chrono Trigger? The mere mention of it sends a shiver of anticipation and fear through the industry. How do you even approach remaking a pixel art masterpiece that many consider perfect? It's the ultimate high-wire act. We're also going to see more sequel remakes like Final Fantasy VII Remake, projects that are so ambitious they can't be contained to a single release. Could the Metal Gear Solid series get this treatment? It's a licensing nightmare, but the desire is there. And what about the games from the PS3, Xbox 360 era that were hampered by ambitious ideas that outstripped the technology of the time? Imagine a Lair remake with functional controls, or a Spore remake that fully realized its initial promise. The future of remakes is no longer just about making old games look new. It's about finishing unfinished symphonies. It's about taking the games that were almost masterpieces and giving them the tools to finally become what they were meant to be. The potential is limitless, and for better or worse, the classics we hold dear are all potentially next in line for a second chance. And that, my fellow Codex scholars, brings us to the end of our quest through the world of video game remakes. We've navigated the definitions, celebrated the masterpieces, learned from the disasters, and even dared to predict the future. It's a fascinating, complex landscape. These projects are more than just products. They are conversations between our past and our present. They ask us what we value about our history. Do we value the original, unaltered experience, warts and all, or do we value the core ideas, the characters and stories, which can be liberated from their technical constraints and set free to soar in new ways? There is no single easy answer. The Demon's Souls approach and the Final Fantasy VII Remake approach can and should coexist. One preserves a moment in time. The other argues that time is a river, and you can step into it in a new way. So the next time you see a remake announced, I want you to think about what you're really hoping for. Are you looking for a perfect museum piece? Or are you hoping for a wild, unpredictable reimagining? Let me know in the comments below. What classic game do you desperately want to see remade, and which philosophy would you want the developers to follow? Thank you so much for joining me on this journey from pixels to polygons. This is Alora signing off from the Game Codex. Remember, keep playing, keep questioning, and never let anyone tell you that your nostalgia isn't a powerful force. Now go fire up an old classic or its shiny new counterpart and see for yourself. See you next time.